I saw a social media post online the other day where someone was complaining and saying that they had lost all this money on this transaction and this deal. And in the comment section, all these people hopped in and said, "Oh, well, you should have done this, or you should have done that, or everyone knows this is how it typically goes. And oh, what about your realtor did this, or did your attorney do that?" And they're giving all these pieces of advice and information and saying this, not actually going into detail with where this person purchased or where they've even purchased, right? Just because a deal was structured a certain way when you purchased your home, that doesn't mean it's going to be the same across the board, especially when you're... Welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home. We'll be offering expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. In this week's episode, we'll be going a bit back to the basics and discussing the actual process or timeline for home buying. Right? How much time do you need to allocate? When should you start preparing? What are the things that are typically happening during the course of a transaction? We're going to touch on all of that and kind of give you a brief overview so you have a better idea of what type of timeline you're looking at and how long this process can take and what all is involved at different stages. Now, before I get into the details, one thing I do want to say is that the disclaimer I want to give at this point, I should say, is that real estate is done differently in almost every state, right? It's there's always some nuances. There may be similarities here and there, but real estate is always done differently based on the state and their forms and contracts. Sometimes real estate deals can even be different within a state, right? There might be a state that has one area that has certain forms of contracts that they use, and another area within that same state that has different forms and contracts and ways that they do the process, right? And so I don't want you to look at this process and say this is the way that it works for everyone across the board, but this will give you a general idea for how it works and how we typically do real estate deals in the triangle. I saw a social media post online the other day where someone was complaining and saying that they had lost all this money on this transaction and this deal. And in the comment section, all these people hopped in and said, "Oh, well, you should have done this, or you should have done that, or everyone knows this is how it typically goes. And oh, what about your realtor did this, or did your attorney do that?" And they're giving all these pieces of advice and information and saying this, not actually going into detail with where this person purchased or where they've even purchased, right? Just because a deal was structured a certain way when you purchased your home, that doesn't mean it's going to be the same across the board, especially when you're crossing over into different states and different areas, right? Everyone does things a little bit differently. And so you want to make sure that you have at least a general understanding of that prior to getting into it. Now, you don't need to be an expert. That's what you hire the realtor for. But you do need to have somewhat of an understanding of how the process works. And so we're going to talk through what a typical deal or transaction looks like and what I typically prepare buyers for whenever I start working with someone so that you can have a better understanding of it. And as we start to branch over into this year of 2025, if buying a home is a part of your process or part of one of your goals, you can use this information to kind of get a better feel for where you stand in the process and what things you need to be prepared for when you're ready for that moment. Buying a house is a tremendously tedious, it could be a long, complicated process. A lot of times it's usually when we think about making a big purchase, like maybe for a laptop or a car or something like that. You might do months of research and kind of playing around with the other people's and seeing what is out there, playing different tools. You might go to the store and kind of look at the models and see what's out there. And then once you're actually ready to purchase, you can usually do that within a day, right? It usually happens very quickly. A house is very different in that sense, in that you may spend just as much time researching and learning about the areas, but once you're actually ready to purchase that house, the actual transaction can take a month, 2 months, in some cases, whatever. It can take a lot longer. And so it's a much more drawn out process than what we're typically used to. And the average person is usually only going to buy a house maybe a handful of times in their entire life, if that. And so it's definitely something where you need to make sure that you're always in tune, and the process can change based on what the rules are. And so, again, like I said, I just want to kind of give you guys a general understanding and talk through some of those different processes, right? And so whenever I have someone reach out who's looking to purchase a home, it could be anywhere from next week that they want to start looking to next year, right? It could be like months from now or something like that. It always depends on the buyer and their situation and stuff. One thing I always have said from the beginning is that it's never too early to prepare. It's never too early to start learning about the process. You're never going to be over prepared, right? Like I said, there's always going to be things that you don't know and things that you're going to learn along the way, but it never hurts to get learning about the process as early as you can so that you're ready to pull the trigger and move a lot faster than most other buyers who are entering the market. And when I'm doing my initial buyer consultation, I'm a little more old school. And so I will even go so far as to take out a sheet of paper. And sometimes I'll do it digitally, but it's a lot easier if I could take out a sheet of paper and I will literally hand draw a timeline walking them through every stage of the process. And like I said, it sounds old school, it sounds outdated and antiquated and everything like that. However, that has been by far one of the best ways that I have found to show buyers and prepare them for what's down the pipeline, right? I want to make sure that you are not blindsided, that you're not surprised as little as possible. Now, no realtor can guarantee you a stress-free transaction. I've said that before and I'll keep saying it again. We can't promise that, but we can teach you as much about the process as possible to avoid a lot of those surprises, right? And so more times than not, if something does happen or something goes down, I've usually prepared my buyer for whatever that situation may be in these initial conversations, right? And so I'm going to talk through some of the things that I typically go through. I'm not going to talk you through the entire buyer timeline, but I'll give you an idea of how most of it goes. So usually in the first few months, kind of gearing up to buy, you usually have what's the preparation period. And at this point, you're typically just talking with your realtor, learning more about the area. They may set you up with the home search so you can start seeing properties that are coming available. That's always a great thing to do just so you can kind of get a better idea and a feel for what you're looking for. You may decide that you like a certain area and then completely change your mind after you see some of the sales and stuff like that in the area, or have you had a chance to drive by, right? So usually you want to try to reserve a couple months, if possible, to just scout locations, right? You want to drive around, get a feel for the area, look online, see what sales have happened. If you see homes that are up for sale, even though you're not looking to buy right then, you can still pay attention and see like, oh, hey, what did that house sell for? How long did it sell on the market, right? You can learn to know like, hey, if we're looking in this area, we need to be on top of things and ready to move. If we're looking in this other area, we might have a little more time to kind of make up our mind and stuff like that. Those are things that you can learn in those initial months. You also want to use this time to get pre-approved with a lender. Most of the time when you're making an offer on a home or considering making an offer, they're going to require some type of pre-approval letter from a lender to make sure that you are at least somewhat vetted, right? The pre-approval isn't a guarantee of the loan. It's just saying that they've already looked at your tax records, your information, they verified your credit score and all that stuff, and they've made sure that you are good to go in that respect, whatever. And so, like I said, the preparation, you're really just preparing yourself to make sure that when you are ready to make that move, you've got all your ducks in a row and you're ready, right? So that time period can be like I said, a week, it could be several months. It's up to you and how well you want to prepare, but it's never too early. I've had some people who have made the preparation stage 2 years long, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, they were just prepared and ready to go once they got. And I've had some people where that period of time is maybe 2 days, right? Where we're just ready to move quickly and stuff like that too. The more time you can give yourself in that stage, the more prepared you're going to be and the less surprises you're going to encounter in that transaction. So that's the preparation stage. After you move out of that, now we're moving into the part where we're actually touring houses and making offers on different properties. Now, this is where you're actually walking inside of the home, getting to see it in person. I shouldn't say I have done deals where people have purchased a house sight unseen. I just typically don't recommend that you do that. It's always best if you can see that house in person, lay eyes on it yourself. If you're buying a home with someone else, only one person can make it to the showing, I'm going to do everything possible to see that both people can get in that house too. There have been times where we've had to make it work with only one person, but again, there's some things that you just don't even know you don't like until you actually see it in person, right? And so I want to make sure that everyone who is involved in that decision and is going to be paying the mortgage or living in that home has had an opportunity to actually lay eyes and get inside of there, right? So all this time you're touring the houses, looking at properties. Anytime someone sees a property that they really like or that they want to consider putting in an offer, I will always do a comparative market analysis for them, which is basically just a fancy way of saying I'm going to see like, hey, what do I think this house is worth? And I'm going to try to use, it's not a professional appraisal. That's not done at that point or that stage of the game, but it's our best educated guess of what that home's value is based on surrounding sales. So I always do that so that you aren't going in blind. Now, I'll never make the decision for you. That's still up to the buyer to do, right? I'm not going to say, hey, you need to offer this or you have to offer this to get this home, but I will give you all the information so that you can make a decision that you feel comfortable doing. Because at the end of the day, I'm not paying on that mortgage, right? You're the one that's going to be living there. You're the one that's paying that mortgage and making that investment in that place. And so that decision should always remain up to you as the buyer, right? So in that initial stage, like I said, we're touring houses, you're making offers on different properties, and then hopefully you can get a chance where you finally actually go under contract. Now, the process of actually looking at homes, again, just like the preparation stage, that varies depending on the buyer. I've had some buyers where they see one house, that's the one they want, and bam, they're ready to go and make that offer right there out of the gate and go on a contract on that home. I've had others where we spend months looking at different houses and stuff like that too. The process just varies. On average, I would say we typically are usually looking at homes for about and making offers on different properties for about a month or two, and they might look at, I'd say, anywhere between 8 to 10 homes or so is about the average that I typically do. If now you might hear stories of people who say, hey, we were looking for a year and we looked at 50 houses. If that's the case, I would question and wonder if that buyer was actually really serious about the offer that they want to make, right? If you're looking at that many houses, once you get past about like 10 or 15 homes, then you have to start wondering, okay, like, is what you're actually looking for, does that actually exist? Or there are actually options out there that are good fit for you and stuff like that? You might need to figure out like, okay, if we looked at the first 5 houses and you don't even remotely like those ones or can't even remotely see yourself living there, that's a sign that we might need to make some tweaks or changes or adjustments to our search to make sure we're finding something that's a better fit for you. But again, like I said, that not to say that there is a standard, a limit on how many homes that you can view, but you can usually tell after about the first 5-7 homes what you're liking, what type of things are out there and stuff like that too. We're starting to get a little bit more inventory on the market so that it's not like 2021 where it was like, hey, this one house that you looked at, you got to be ready to move on it immediately. Like you can take a little bit more time to think about it and see what's best out there. But like I said, all that time we're just preparing things. And then once you write that offer and submit it, if it is accepted, that's when you'll actually initiate or start the process of going through the home purchase, right? That process, that what I'm about to go through in the detail, it could take anywhere from 30 to 45 days or so. Sometimes it might go up to the 60 mark or a little bit beyond, but more times than not, you're usually looking at between that 30 to 45 day mark. In our area, we have what's called a due diligence period. And this is a period of time where the buyer is essentially figuring out whether or not they want to go through with the sale of this house, right? That's when they're doing all the inspections, appraisals, all that different things, and seeing if there's any red flags or things that just don't line up with what they're looking for in that home. And so you want to give them that time to get all that stuff prepared, do the appraisal, find out if the home is actually worth what they're paying for it. If they want to get a survey done, that's all happening during that time period. Also during the due diligence. And one of the biggest reasons why it takes as long as it does is for a loan approval, right? So you're doing the loan application. A lot of people are under the impression that when they do their pre-approval, that is their loan application. And there's another whole step or whole series of steps after that point, right? So when you're doing pre-approval, that's just saying like, hey, we looked at some of the general things that we're seeing for your finances and everything. And based on that initial scope and idea, we say, hey, they're pre-approved, which means that like we're pretty sure that they should qualify for this, but we haven't done a deep dive, right? It's during the actual process of the loan application when they're trying to get final loan approval. That's when they're really doing the deep dive and searching for all the skeletons, all the things that you may have been hiding, those like random payments or those unique things or features about your job that they may not have discovered until after the fact. All that's happening during that point. Now, if you have a quality lender who knows what they're doing, a pre-approval is usually going to be good enough to let you know that, hey, this is a solid chance this deal is going to go through. If you have a lender or you're working with someone who is not familiar with how deals work in the area, or they're not really doing a thorough job of looking at all of your income and finances, loan approval could become an issue for you, even though you have that pre-approval for them, right? It's all in how they do a good job. And so you definitely want to talk with your realtor and make sure that you're working with a quality lender, because financing issues is the number one reason that deals fall apart. And so you really want to make sure that you are doing everything you can in that process, right? And so the touring houses, just to give kind of a recap up to this point, you have the preparation stage, which is usually a few months of just researching, learning, scouting areas, and everything like that, and getting pre-approval. Then you have the part where you're touring houses and making offers. That's usually going to last about a month or so, depending on what type of home you're looking for and whether or not the inventory is really available in that area. And then you move from that stage over into the due diligence period. Now, due diligence on average, it typically lasts about 3 to 4 weeks. If you're the buyer, you want this period of time to last as long as possible, because you want to give yourself plenty of time to see if there's anything wrong with this house or any reason why you won't be able to go through with that sale. If you're the seller, you want that time to be as short as possible, right? Because you want to make sure that that deal can actually close. And you know, the longer they keep you in this point, if they don't actually close that deal, all this time they spent is just wasted time. Right. And so one thing that we started doing in our area in about 2011 was we introduced what's called our due diligence fee. And this is a specific amount of money that you can give up. It can be as low or as high as you want it to be. Right. It could be a few $100s, which probably isn't going to get you in contract acceptance, or it could be tens of thousands of dollars, right? There's no cap, there's no floor to it. And this is one thing where you're really going to have to lean on your realtor's expertise to figure out how much that due diligence fee needs to be for the home that you're looking at and everything else, right? If it's a home that has been sitting on the market for 200 days and they have no offers and they're just desperate for something, you can probably get away with a lower due diligence fee. If it's a market or a house or something like that that's very popular in a hot area, you're going to have to be willing to give up more. And again, you want to lean on your realtor to figure out what is a reasonable amount that can help you get that house, because the due diligence fee is a unique feature in the sense that if the deal closes successfully, it is credited back to you. But if that deal falls apart for any reason, whether you chose to back out of the deal or the financing fell through, whether it's your fault or it's not, whether you got cold feet or the lender said you don't qualify for this loan, if any reason whatsoever that deal falls apart, you lose or forfeit that due diligence fee to the seller. So again, if the deal closes, it's a deposit. If the deal falls apart, it turns into a fee. And so that's why it's a really big risk in a lot of cases with that due diligence fee. But that's also why the seller cares a lot about what that fee is going to be up front, because they know, hey, like if things fall apart, I at least have some compensation for the time that I wasted with this buyer in this deal that isn't working out, right? And so the 3 to 4 weeks or however much time you request in there, the reason or you have that time or that ability is because you're giving that due diligence fee up to the seller to say that, hey, I'm serious about staying in this deal. I just want to check on these other things as well. Now, granted, you as the buyer do still have some leverage, even if you've given up a high due diligence fee, because if they find something, let's say there's a crack in the foundation or the structure of the home, yes, like we live in a state whereas every home is technically sold as is, right? And so if you find something like that, you can make that request for the seller to fix it, but the seller is not required to make that repair. They don't have to make that fix. However, it's usually in their best interest to try to work things out with you, because if they don't, now that they know about it, they can no longer claim ignorance or say that, oh, we weren't aware of that massive crack in the foundation. They have to disclose that to all the other potential buyers. And if those buyers find out, they're not likely to pay or be willing to pay as much as you were for that house, right? And so the seller knows, okay, I need to be willing to work with this buyer in some capacity and figure out a way to make things work out with them, because if it's a serious enough problem, they likely won't have the same success in being able to sell that home after the fact, right? And so all of this is happening during that due diligence period. You're getting all those inspections, the appraisals, loan application, all that is being done. Any negotiations for repairs or appraisal price, all that's happening in this period of time. And so it's a lot that is going down in that due diligence period. That is the most crucial time. And when I'm drawing out the timeline for my clients, that's the portion of the timeline that I spend the most time talking about, because that's where we really want to make sure that you are fully prepared for what could or could not happen during that particular period of time. But on average, it's about 3 or 4 weeks. A competitive timeline that gives you as the buyer enough time, but it still works for the seller, is about 3 weeks. That's typically the sweet spot of how long. Now, if you go up to the 4 weeks or longer, you're going to need to be prepared to give up a hefty due diligence fee, because the seller knows that could potentially be even more wasted time if you don't actually close that deal. And so they typically want that time to be around 3 weeks. After due diligence is done, this is when you start to breathe a little bit easier. This is the pending phase. And this is typically when you are just tying up loose ends. You're crossing T's, you're dotting I's. As the buyer, you've already gotten conditional loan approval, or should have gotten conditional loan approval by that point. So you know, like, hey, the loan's pretty much wrapped up. You've already done any repair negotiations. You've likely done appraisal negotiations if that was a requirement. And this is typically the time too where I tell buyers, all right, now you should be safe to go ahead and start scheduling for utilities to be turned on or transferred to your name, or you should be good to start scheduling for movers. Once it gets to this stage, we're usually pretty certain that that deal is going to go through. Now, again, there's plenty of things that can still go wrong at that point. And actually, for the realtor and the lender, tends to be a scarier time, because this is also when buyers tend to kind of take their foot off the gas and breathe a little easier and start doing things that can make mistakes, right? And so this is where they start doing all the things that can potentially mess up a loan that we've talked about in the past, right? Where they go out and finance a new car, they sign up for a credit card, or they do something that impacts their credit score, they change jobs or something like that, and it messes up the loan and the whole deal falls apart and stuff like that too. So I don't want you to think that once you get to this stage, you're in the clear, but you usually have a pretty firm idea that things are going to work out once you get to that point. You can breathe a little bit easier, right? The first few weeks, you're just handing out checks and stressing and wondering, like, okay, is this going to work out? Is this going to go through? That's the not so fun part of buying a home, is going through that whole due diligence period. But once you get to pending, you can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you feel a little bit better about that deal. And on average, that period of time is typically going to be about 1 to 2 weeks long. Now, sometimes you can structure the deal where this lasts a little bit longer, but in our experience, the longer it takes for a deal to close, the less likely it is to actually close. And so even if both sides have very flexible timelines and they're like, hey, we can close whenever, or hey, we can close later, we're still going to try to keep that closing timeline as tight as possible, because, again, there's just a number of things that can go wrong the longer you make that timeline go. So pending is typically around 1 to 3 weeks. And then you initially get to the closing day. This is the day that everyone loves. This is the day when everything becomes official and it's etched in stone and there's no going back, right? So in our state, we have 2 different events that typically happen on that day. We have a settlement appointment and we have closing. Right. And those are 2 separate events. And the reason it's important for you to understand that those are 2 separate events is because the settlement appointment, that is essentially where you're just signing all the paperwork for the lender. You're going through and talking with the attorney about like, hey, here's the terms of the loan, here's the warranty deed. A lot of the stuff you've already talked with your lender, but again, they're just making sure that you understand. That's when you have to bring all the proceeds, the funds that you need to actually purchase the home. All that needs to be wired to the attorney's office. So all that is happening on that settlement appointment date, right? So that's when you're signing all the papers. The closing, though, that is what is most important. You can sign papers all day long, and it means absolutely nothing if the deal doesn't close. Closing is when the attorney reviews all the paperwork you signed. They send it over to the lender to make sure that, hey, does everything look good? Does everything sign correctly? And if they sign off on it, then the attorney releases and disperses the funds out to everyone, and they record your name in the county deed. That's the key. That's when it officially becomes your home. That's when your name is recorded on that deed. That's when the deal is official, etched in stone. There is no going back after that point. That is your home, right? That's the most important thing. Now, again, they're two separate events, and so important thing to keep in mind is that they usually take place within a couple hours of each other, but they are separate events. And so the reason I bring that up is that you would never want to have a settlement appointment on a Friday at 4 p.m. And then have like a closing that couldn't happen, right? Because you wouldn't be able to record the names in the deed fast enough for that house to officially become yours, which means that you would have to wait until the courts open back up on a business day that following Monday. And that house would technically be yours, right? Because a lot of people will get really gung-ho and they're like, hey, we signed all the papers. Where are the keys? We can't give you the keys, or we can't allow you to go inside of that house until that deed is recorded. We have horror stories of people who got keys before the deed was recorded, moved in and bust a pipe in the house or messed something up. And now the insurance company has an issue because they're like, hey, yes, you busted a pipe in that home, but that house wasn't technically yours yet because the deed hadn't been recorded, right? And so it's very important that people understand in our area and the way that we do our deals and transactions, that is the most important linchpin in how all this is structured. Is nothing is official until that deed is recorded. That's the official closing day, and that's when you're finally good to start moving everything in and all that stuff as well, and get all that ready to go. So again, you got the preparation period, which is typically about a couple months. The time where you're touring houses and making offers, that's typically about a month. Due diligence period, which is typically about 3 weeks long, sometimes 4. The pending period, which is about 1 to 2 weeks, and then your closing day. And so when you look at that timeline in its totality, you're looking at, I'd say, anywhere from about 4 to 5 months out should typically be the time when you should start looking, right? So if you want to close on a house in April, I'd say December would be a great time to. Now, again, we've made it work on a faster timeline, right? Like I've had plenty of situations and times where they reached out to me beforehand. But if you really want to be prepared, give yourself about a good 4 to 5 months from when you want to be closed and moved into that house. And that's really going to set you up in the best position possible. Again, all this can vary depending on what area or state you're in, and it's always important to talk with your realtor, but it's never too early for you to be prepared. I hope that's helpful for you all. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you next week.